Patricia Trish Holt sat quietly in her midnight blue Honda Civic, parked midway along the cul-de-sac she once called home. The warm Atlanta evening drifted through the slightly opened window, carrying the scent of magnolia and sun-baked pavement. Above her, the sky glowed with soft peach and amber shades as day slipped toward dusk. It should have been the kind of moment that stirred old memories, but Trish felt nothing except calm satisfaction. She wasn't here to grieve anything. She was here to watch justice unfold. Her hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, steady and relaxed as a black Escalade turned onto the street. She recognized it instantly. She once helped pay for it back when she believed loyalty mattered. The SUV slowed as it approached the empty lot where her $800,000 brick colonial had stood just days ago. The place where she once poured 28 years of her life, hope, and stability. The back door opened, and Frank Holt stepped out. His skin held the deep tan of a man returning from a tropical vacation, a destination wedding trip he took with the woman he had replaced his wife with. He adjusted the collar of his linen shirt and squinted around in confusion, the sun highlighting every crease of stress he tried to hide. Next came Amber Laurent, wobbling on cheap nude heels and pushing back a humidity-puffed wig. She looked around with wide eyes, her oversized fake sunglasses perched on her head as if they could shield her from reality. Then the kids stepped out. Jake, 25, dragging his duffel bag with a frown forming slowly. And Sophie, 22, already raising her phone, ready to record before she even knew what was happening. Their expressions shifted all at once as they finally saw it. The house was gone, not damaged, not altered, not under repair, just gone, bulldozed, cleared, flattened, so cleanly that the land looked like a fresh canvas waiting for its next purpose. The dirt was smooth, the edges neat, the ground almost peaceful in its emptiness. Trish watched their reactions, like a scene unfolding on a screen she had waited months to witness. Frank staggered forward, eyes widening with disbelief. "Where is my house?" he shouted, voice cracking with panic. Amber clutched his arm. "Frank, this can't be happening. Tell me this isn't real." Jake looked around in circles, as if the house might reappear if he focused hard enough. Sophie stared with her mouth open, her phone hanging in her hand, completely forgetting to record for once. Trish lifted her sweet tea to her lips, taking a slow sip, the ice tapping softly against the cup. She didn't need to rush anything. Every second of their shock was a reward she had earned. As she watched Frank's panic rise, she remembered the message that started it all, the text he sent the night before he flew to St. Lucia with Amber. A message that ended nearly 3 decades of marriage without a hint of guilt. "Be gone when we get back. I'm done, Trish. I hate old things. You're draining my life. I deserve a new start with someone young." No conversation. No closure. Just cruelty disguised as honesty. But instead of collapsing, Trish calculated. Instead of crying, she planned. Instead of breaking, she rebuilt herself. Amber stepped toward the empty lot. "Frank, maybe we came to the wrong street." He snapped at her, frustration boiling. "I lived here for 28 years. This is the right street." Sophie finally found her voice. "Who would do this?" Trish took another slow sip of her drink, her heartbeat steady, her spirit unshaken. They wanted to know who would do this. The answer was simple. The woman they underestimated, the woman they discarded, the woman they thought was too old to fight back. She watched them with the calm of someone who had already won and whispered under her breath, "This is only the beginning." Because it was as Frank paced across the leveled dirt, shouting into the empty space where walls and windows once stood. Patricia Trish Holt remained seated in her Honda Civic, watching him unravel with the quiet confidence of a woman who finally understood her own power. The warm Atlanta air carried the faint hum of cicadas, the neighborhood still tranquil despite the chaos growing in Frank's voice. He ran his hand through his hair, breathing hard. "This has to be illegal. Someone must have broken in or... His voice trailed off as he struggled to form a thought that made sense. Amber clung to his arm, her heels sinking slightly into the soft earth, her face twisted in confusion. Trish knew exactly what he was feeling. She had felt the same confusion the day she found a lace thong in the dryer bright red. Clearly not hers. clearly not meant to be hidden. It was Amber's size, Amber's cheap brand, Amber's scent. That moment had cracked something inside Trish. Not because she hadn't expected betrayal, but because of how shamelessly careless it was. Frank hadn't even bothered to hide it. He thought she was too old, too tired, too broken to do anything about it. He had miscalculated. Everything changed the moment she realized that she and Frank never truly owned the house together. She had bought it with her inheritance from her father. Her name alone was on the original deed. Years later, she added Frank's name as a courtesy, a gesture of trust, a symbol of partnership. But the law didn't care about sentiment. It cared about ownership. And ownership was backed by paperwork, signatures, and everything Frank didn't pay attention to. The day after finding Amber's thong, Trish had walked into Margaret Daniels' downtown law office. Margaret, a sharp, stylish black attorney known for turning divorces into masterpieces, had reviewed the documents with a slow smile. "Honey, your husband doesn't own this house. His name is on the title, but the real deed belongs to you alone. And that thong? That's your ticket out." Trish followed every instruction. She revoked Frank's gifted interest. She sold the property legally. She signed demolition orders legally. She cleared the land legally. And she made sure every step was documented, time-stamped, and protected. Now, in the present moment, her phone buzzed in the cup holder. She picked it up and saw Margaret's name on the screen. The message was short and perfect. "Everything is airtight. You're protected. Enjoy your evening." She placed the phone down and exhaled slowly. Frank was still spiraling. "This is impossible. Someone had to steal something. Houses don't just disappear." Amber stumbled over the flattened soil, nearly tripping as she clutched her small purse. "What about the pool? What about the 3-car garage? What about everything?" Their voices were rising, frantic, messy. It was a strange contrast to the quiet order of the cleared foundation. The contractors had done flawless work. Even the surrounding grass was neatly trimmed, the edges smooth like a promise kept. Jake finally spoke, irritation lacing his tone. "Dad, can you call the cops? Or the city? Somebody messed up." Frank pulled out his phone, dialing with shaking fingers. He barked into the receiver. "Jameson? It's me. Tell me you didn't approve anything to do with my house." A beat of silence followed. Then Frank's face fell. "What do you mean it wasn't my house to approve? I own it." More silence. His skin paled under the tan. He didn't realize Trish could hear every word carried by the light summer breeze. Jameson, their longtime family lawyer, was explaining to Frank what Trish already knew. The sale was legal. The demolition was legal. And Frank had no claim. Frank hung up. Stunned. Amber looked up at him with wide brown eyes. "Baby, what did he say?" Frank swallowed hard. He said, "I don't own the property." Amber blinked. "What do you mean you don't own it? We were supposed to move in today." Frank snapped, "I don't know." He looked around like the house might suddenly rise from the earth and save him from embarrassment. But nothing moved. Nothing came back. Everything was gone because Trish had erased it cleanly, carefully, and lawfully. He tried calling another number, pacing fast enough to break a sweat. "Lawrence, I need you to check something. My house is gone. Yes, gone. Trish must have done something. I need to know if—" He froze in place. "What do you mean it was her house? What do you mean she revoked?" His voice cracked again, louder, more desperate. Amber stepped closer. "Frank, what are we going to do? Where are we supposed to go?" Trish took another sip of her drink, letting the cold sweetness wash over her tongue, her heartbeat steady. They deserved to feel this confusion. They deserved to face the shock. They deserved to learn finally that she wasn't the passive, aging woman Frank had convinced himself she was. She glanced toward the lot one more time, admiring how peaceful it looked without lies inside it. Everything he thought he controlled had slipped from his hands. And he didn't even know where to begin. This was phase 2. And he hadn't even realized. Phase 1 was over. Frank was still pacing across the cleared land when another car pulled into the cul-de-sac. Jake's old Honda Accord, its brakes squealing as it stopped crooked beside the Escalade. Jake's younger sister, Sophie, jumped out first, clutching her phone in a trembling hand. Her camera was already recording, her voice tight with disbelief as she narrated for her followers. Y'all, I swear I'm not making this up. My dad's house is literally gone. Her glossy lips trembled, but she didn't stop filming. Jake walked up beside her, rubbing his forehead, staring at the empty lot. Man, what the hell is going on? Where's the house? Where am I supposed to sleep? Where's my stuff? Where's my stuff? My sneakers? My PS5? Dad, what did you do? Frank rounded on him, shouting, I didn't do anything. Your mother, she must have, His voice trailed off, because even he didn't know how to explain the consequences of his own arrogance. Amber shifted her weight, trying to balance in her sinking heels. Frank, baby, you told me everything was handled. You said you were divorcing her after the wedding. You told me this house was ours. Her voice cracked and her carefully painted confidence collapsed with it. You said all we had to do was come home to our new life. Frank snapped, stop saying ours. I don't even know what's happening. Trish watched the scene unfold for another quiet moment before finally opening her car door and stepping out. The warm Georgia air wrapped around her as she smoothed her dress, adjusted her purse strap, and walked across the street with the calm poise of a woman who had spent months preparing for this exact moment. All four heads turned when they saw her. Frank's face drained completely. Amber's mouth dropped open. Jake's eyebrows shot up. Sophie's phone immediately pointed toward Trish, live stream still rolling. Trish stopped at the edge of the empty lot. She didn't shout. She didn't rush. She simply stood there, her posture tall and steady. Frank's voice wavered. Trish, what did you do? She looked him straight in the eye. What I had the right to do. What the law made me to do. What you pushed me to do. Amber took a step closer, anger returning. You destroyed the house because you're bitter. You're crazy. Trish turned her gaze to Amber with the calmness of a woman who refused to be disrespected again. Sweetheart, the only crazy thing here is how much faith you put in a man who couldn't even keep up with his own lies. Jake looked back and forth between them. Mom, please tell me my stuff isn't gone. Trish kept her voice smooth. Your things are handled. You'll find out where soon. Frank stormed toward her, chest puffed, finger pointed, voice trembling. You can't just demolish my house. This is illegal, Trish. I'm calling the police. I'm suing you. Trish's expression didn't change. Then call them. File whatever you want. But you should probably start with asking your lawyer why he never told you the house wasn't yours. Frank blinked. What are you talking about? She stepped closer, speaking clearly enough that everyone heard. The house was bought with my inheritance, my money, my name. I added you to the title out of trust, not obligation. And when you broke that trust publicly, proudly, foolishly, I revoked it. Legally, everything I did was by the book, Amber gasped. Wait, so the house wasn't his at all? Trish tilted her head gently. Legally? No. Amber's voice cracked in horror. But we got married. And that's when Trish smiled. Not cruelly, just knowingly. No, dear. You had a ceremony. A photo shoot. A trip. But no marriage license was ever filed. I checked, you're not his wife. You're just his girlfriend with a ring he put on your finger to distract you. Amber's face went blank and the color drained from her cheeks. Frank's jaw tightened. You had no right to check. I had every right, Trish replied smoothly. Especially when you sent me a text telling me to leave my own house. Because you deserve someone younger. That text is on record. It proves motive, intent, and abandonment. Margaret will be using it at the hearing. Sophie finally lowered her phone. Dad, you said the paperwork was done. You said you two were married. Amber turned slowly toward Frank. You told me it was legal. You told me you filed everything. Frank sputtered. I was going to. I just needed time. Trish finished for him. Money? Stability? Honesty? She looked at Amber. He needed all the things he didn't have anymore. Amber's voice broke. Frank, did you lie to me? He snapped back at her. Why does it matter? We'll fix it. But Amber wasn't listening. She stared at the empty lot like her future had been bulldozed with the house. Jake stepped forward. Mom, if Dad's not married, and the house wasn't his, then... His voice drifted off. Then everything you see here, Trish said gently, was mine to do with as I pleased. Frank's voice rose again, desperate. So you really tore down the whole house? Trish nodded calmly. Every brick, every window, every memory you tried replacing with someone half my age. Frank stared at her in disbelief. Trish took a deep breath and spoke with quiet finality. This is what happens when a man thinks his wife is weak. And the cul-de-sac, once filled with the sound of children, holidays, laughter, and years of life, fell silent again, except for the warm summer breeze brushing softly across the empty foundation where their past used to stand. The air in the cul-de-sac felt heavier now. The sun was sinking low, casting long shadows across the empty lot as Frank tried to make sense of a reality he never expected. His voice rose and fell in desperate fragments as he paced, dialing numbers that no longer held any power for him. Amber stood off to the side, arms crossed tightly, mascara smudging beneath her eyes. Jake and Sophie watched in stunned silence, unsure which version of their father they were seeing for the first time. The liar, the manipulator, or the man facing the consequences of his own choices. Trish remained steady, rooted in the center of the chaos like a calm force the wind couldn't shake. She had waited months for this moment, but she didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice. Her strength showed in her stillness. Frank finally stopped pacing and turned toward her. Where are my things? You didn't throw away my stuff too, did you? Trish met his eyes without hesitation. No, I don't operate out of spite. Everything you own is safe. Amber scoffed loudly. Safe where? Because it's not in this dirt. Trish reached into her purse, pulled out a small silver key, and held it between two fingers. It glinted in the fading sunlight. Frank stared at it, confused. She walked forward and placed it in his palm. Storage Unit 247, she said, her tone even and smooth. Downtown, climate controlled, paid through the end of the month. Frank blinked hard. What do you mean, the end of the month? What happens after that? Trish lifted one eyebrow. You start paying for it, or you lose your belongings. That's how storage units work. Jake muttered under his breath. Damn, Amber stepped forward, aggression rising again. So you're just throwing him out with nothing? After 28 years? He built this house with you. Trish turned toward her slowly, almost kindly. He didn't build anything. I used my inheritance to buy the original property. I handled the renovation loans. I paid the contractors. I furnished every room. I kept every bill paid for nearly 3 decades. The only thing Frank built was a fantasy. Frank's face tightened, caught between humiliation and anger. You can't twist things to look like I did nothing. I provided. Trish didn't let him finish. She stepped closer, speaking with the calm precision of a woman stating facts that would stand in court. Provided? Frank, the only thing you consistently provided was stress. You cheated, you lied, you drained accounts, you bought gifts for someone else using my money. And then you texted me to leave my own home. You didn't just break a marriage. You disrespected a woman who held everything together while you treated her like she didn't exist. Amber's mouth hung open slightly. Sophie lowered her phone again, guilt flickering across her face. Jake looked stunned, as though he was hearing his parents' truth for the first time. Frank's voice wavered. You're twisting everything. You always did this, made yourself look like the victim. Trish breathed deeply, keeping her voice soft and steady. I'm not the victim. I'm the woman who finally stopped letting you use her. Amber suddenly stepped forward, her frustration morphing into hostility. So what now? You're just gonna ruin his life. You're gonna destroy our marriage too? Trish looked at her, unblinking. There is no marriage to destroy. You two never filed the license. Frank kept telling you he was waiting for the right moment. But the truth was simple. He didn't want to jeopardize his divorce settlement. Marrying you legally would have exposed everything. Amber shook her head, stunned into silence. Frank snapped. It wasn't like that. You don't know. Oh, I know, Trish said evenly. I have the receipts. All of them. Her hand rested lightly on her purse, where a folder of printed documents sat texts. Screenshots, bank statements, legal forms. Evidence strong enough to dismantle any lie Frank might try to hide behind. Amber swallowed hard. Frank, did you seriously lie about us being married? Frank opened his mouth, but the sentence never came. The truth hung in the space between them, heavy and undeniable. Amber stepped back from him. You told me everything was settled. You told me the house was ours. You told me Trish cut in gently. He told you what he needed to tell you so you wouldn't ask questions. He needed somewhere to run after he destroyed his marriage. But he didn't think the place he expected to land would disappear before he got back. Frank clenched his fists. This is unbelievable. You planned all of this. Trish didn't flinch. Yes, I did. After you sent me that text, I made sure everything was done the right way. You wanted me gone when you got back. Instead, I chose to remove everything you took for granted. Amber glared at her. You're just a bitter old... Trish stepped closer, her tone dropping into a level calm that made the entire cul-de-sac fall silent. Be very careful with your next word. Amber froze, her breath catching in her throat. Trish continued, voice steady and unshaken. I don't raise my voice. I don't fight dirty. I don't throw insults at women younger than me. But I protect myself. And I protect my peace. And if you step out of line again, every threat you've made, every message you've sent, every insult you've thrown, will go straight into the restraining order Margaret is already preparing. Amber went cold. Sophie stepped back. Jake stared at his father, then at his mother, trying to understand the woman he had underestimated his whole life. Frank tried one last time. Trish, please, please. Can't we talk? Calmly, privately? Her eyes held his for a long, quiet moment. And when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of every year she had spent holding a family together alone. Frank, I spent decades trying to talk to you calmly and privately. But you only cared about your comfort. Now, for the first time, I care about mine. And with that, the truth settled heavily around them. Phase 2 wasn't coming. It had already begun. The moment Trish mentioned the restraining order, a heavy quietness settled across the cul-de-sac. The sun dipped lower, casting a warm glow over the empty lot, as if the universe itself wanted to spotlight the truth finally unraveling. Frank, wide-eyed and shaken, looked like he was standing on the wreckage of not just a home, but the entire life he had pieced together with lies. Amber kept glancing at him with growing disbelief, her confidence dissolving with every second. Jake shifted uncomfortably, and Sophie hugged her arms around herself, as if realizing she barely knew the man she had defended for so long. Frank tried to recompose himself, brushing imaginary dust from his shirt. Trish, whatever this is, you didn't have to go this far. You're blowing everything out of proportion. But Trish wasn't moved. She took a breath, stepped forward, and spoke with the calm authority of someone who finally had facts, law, and truth on her side. I haven't even started blowing anything out of proportion, Frank. You want to talk about going far? Let's talk about what you went far with. Her voice never rose, but each word landed like a weight he couldn't dodge. You think a demolished house is the worst of your concerns? No, the real mess is everything you tried to hide. Frank tensed. Jake looked up sharply. Amber froze. Trish continued, smooth and controlled. Let's begin with the $63,000 business loan you co-signed for Jake's failed crypto idea. Jake's face drained instantly. Every time he missed a payment, the loan company called you. And every time they called you, you panicked and used my accounts to cover them. I didn't say a word when I discovered it. I protected all of you. And what did you do in return? Lied to me, spent behind my back, and threw me away like I was useless. Jake swallowed hard. Mom, I didn't know you were paying. You weren't supposed to, Trish said gently. Because I knew you weren't ready to handle the truth. Frank jumped in, tone defensive. I was going to fix that. I was handling it. Trish looked at him with heartbreaking clarity. Frank, you haven't handled anything responsibly in years. Amber shifted, suddenly unsure whether she wanted to stand near him. Trish continued, not slowing for a moment. Next, let's talk about your credit cards. $43,000 in personal debt. Vacations, jewelry, restaurants, weekend trips with Amber, and 2 designer bags you claimed were work gifts, all charged on cards you opened. But I ended up paying. And you had the nerve to tell me I was financially draining you. Amber whispered, Oh my God. But Trish wasn't done. And that cute pink Jeep you got, Amber? Amber blinked and held her breath. It wasn't a gift. It wasn't bought in full. It wasn't even approved legitimately. You signed it using my credit score. Monthly payments through the roof. Insurance even higher. And you were late twice before you left for your little wedding trip. Amber turned slowly toward Frank, her expression collapsing. Frank, you told me you bought it cash. Frank stammered, Babe. Listen, I was going to handle it when what? Trish asked calmly. When I kept covering your messes without knowing. When I kept believing you every time you told me, it's handled. Frank snapped, You're exaggerating. That's not how it happened. Trish shook her head, pity touching her voice. Frank, I have every bank statement, every notification, every receipt. I know exactly how it happened. Jake stared at his father, realization dawning. Dad, were we really broke? Trish corrected him softly. Your father was broke. I wasn't. Sophie hugged herself tighter. Dad, why didn't you tell us any of this? Frank's voice cracked under the weight of exposure. I was fixing it. I was getting back on my feet. I had plans. Trish's next words cut cleanly through the air. Plans you couldn't afford. Plans I ended up funding. Plans you never thanked me for. Amber stepped closer to Frank, voice trembling. Frank, if you didn't own the house, and you're in debt, then what do you have? Trish looked directly at her, expression smooth, controlled, almost sympathetic. Nothing. He owns nothing. Frank's mouth opened, but no words came. Trish continued, her tone soft but final. Do you want to know the best part, Frank? That construction company you've been bragging about for years, Holt and Daniel's Construction, the one you told Amber you'd use to build her a dream house? She tilted her head. It doesn't belong to you. Amber blinked. What? Jake frowned. What are you talking about? Sophie gasped softly. Trish spoke clearly. The company legally belongs to Emmy. My name is on the documents. I funded the startup costs. I paid the early payroll. I covered the tax issues you ignored. You are listed as an employee, Frank, not the owner. Not the partner. Not the executive. Just an employee with a paycheck I approved every 2 weeks. Amber staggered slightly. You said you owned a company. Jake stared at his father as if seeing him for the first time. Dad, Sophie whispered, Daddy. You lied about having a business? Frank's face crumpled in humiliation. He had built an entire fantasy life on vanity, lies, and Trish's money. And now every piece was being exposed under the warm glow of the Georgia sunset. Trish took a breath and spoke the truth with quiet authority. You left me because you thought I was the old one. The weak one. The one slowing you down. She gestured around the empty lot. But the only thing holding you together was me. No one moved. No one spoke. Not even the wind dared interrupt. Phase 3 was coming, and Frank was only just beginning to understand how far below zero his life had fallen. The sun dipped lower, wrapping the cul-de-sac in a warm orange glow as Frank stood frozen, absorbing every truth Trish had laid in front of him. His mouth opened, then closed again, unable to form a sentence that wouldn't collapse under the weight of his own lies. Amber shifted away from him, her body language retreating into the sharp reality she'd been avoiding. Jake leaned against his car in disbelief, and Sophie's face carried a mix of embarrassment, shock, and something new, a flicker of understanding. Trish took one step back, not out of fear, but to mark a boundary that had been decades overdue. When she spoke again, her voice was steady, formed with the confidence of a woman who had rebuilt herself from the ashes of someone else's deception. I want you to understand something. Frank, she said, her tone firm yet quiet. Everything you've seen today, every consequence, every missing comfort, every bit of stability you thought would wait for you, all of it is the result of your own decisions. I didn't take your life away. You abandoned it. Frank ran a hand over his face, the tension in his jaw visible. Trish, we don't have to do this. We can talk. We can figure something out. But Trish shook her head gently. There's nothing left to figure out. You made your choices long before today. Amber suddenly stepped in again, trying to regain footing in the conversation. This is petty. You're doing all this because you can't stand that he chose me. Trish turned to her, not angry, just deeply tired of the ignorance. I didn't do this because he chose you. I did this because he disrespected me, lied to me, used me, and told me to disappear from a home I paid for. You weren't the reason he destroyed our marriage. You were just the excuse he used to avoid taking responsibility. Amber blinked, stunned again into silence. Trish continued. And speaking of responsibility, the restraining order is being filed tomorrow. Your threats, your insults, and the messages you left on my voicemail are documented. She glanced directly at Frank, and yours are too. Frank stiffened. You wouldn't do that to me. I already did, Trish replied calmly. Consider yourself notified. Amber stepped back, uneasy. Jake swallowed hard. Sophie's eyes widened, but for once she didn't reach for her phone. Frank shook his head. A restraining order? Really, Trish? This is too far. No, she said quietly. Too far was cheating on me. Too far was lying to our children. Too far was using my accounts. Too far was sending me a text telling me to get out of my own home. A restraining order is just protection. Something I should have chosen years ago. Frank didn't respond. His silence said more than his words ever had. Trish exhaled slowly and stepped a little farther away from them. Her tone shifting, not colder, just done. I want you to hear the next part clearly. I'm moving on. For real this time. Sophie finally found her voice. Moving on. Where? Trish looked at her daughter with a softness that hadn't been present earlier. To my new home, downtown, gated building, doorman, security, paid for in cash. No mortgage. No debt. She let the words settle gently. And no access for any of you without my permission. Jake's expression cracked. Mom, you moved out already? Trish nodded. Yes, I gave myself a fresh start. Something your father thought he was giving himself with lies and trips. Except I did it the right way. Frank stared at her, stunned. So you're just leaving? After everything I've done for you? Trish looked at him with a mixture of sadness and liberation. Frank, you stopped doing anything for me a long time ago. I stayed out of habit. Out of love. Out of hope that you'd grow up. But the truth is, I was raising you. Not building a life with you. Frank dropped his gaze, his chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. And the divorce? He asked finally. Filed, Trish answered. Your adultery speeds the process. You didn't respond to the paperwork I sent months ago, which automatically makes it uncontested. I get the assets. I get the house, well, what used to be the house. You get nothing except the storage unit and the debts you created. Amber gasped and took another step away from him. Jake whispered, Damn. Sophie held her breath. Frank took one shaky step toward Trish, his voice cracking. Trish, please. I'm begging you. Don't do this. She held his gaze, no anger in her eyes, only clarity, strength, and a quiet kind of peace. I'm not punishing you anymore, Frank. I'm releasing myself. And with that, she turned around and began walking back toward her car. No dramatic exit. No raised voice. No threats. Just a woman finally choosing herself. The evening air wrapped around her as she opened her car door. Sat inside and pulled away from the cul-de-sac, leaving Frank, Amber, Jake, and Sophie standing in the fading sunlight, surrounded by the empty ground where their security used to be. Later that night, in her new downtown condo, clean, modern, high above the city lights, Trish sat on her balcony with a glass of wine. The skyline shimmered around her. The breeze felt soft against her skin. The piece was almost melodic. Her phone buzzed. Jake. She looked at the screen for a long moment, then answered with a steady breath. Mom? Dad's losing it. Amber's gone. Sophie's freaking out. And Dad, he has nowhere to go. He's sleeping in his car. Can you just talk to him? Just once? Trish leaned back in her chair, eyes on the glittering city below. She had a choice, a familiar one. But this time, she knew exactly what her answer needed to be. Trish remained seated on her balcony, the soft glow of Atlanta's skyline spreading across the night like a blanket of gold. The air was warm, calm, steady, everything her life had never been with Frank. She held her phone to her ear as Jake's desperate voice spilled through the speaker. His words came fast, tangled together, the sound of a man watching the floor collapse beneath everything he thought he could rely on. Mom, it's bad. It's really bad, he said. Dad's losing it. Amber left him as soon as everything went south. She packed her stuff while he was yelling, called her parents, and just left. Didn't even look back. Sophie's online meltdown went viral, and people are dragging her for filming the lot like it's entertainment. And Dad, he's sleeping in his car. He has nowhere to go. The loan people are calling nonstop. They're blowing up his job. They said they're coming after him for everything. Can you please just talk to him, please? Trish exhaled slowly, staring at the shimmering city lights. Jake, what exactly do you want me to do? I don't know, he whispered. Just something. He's not eating. He's not thinking straight. He's scared. Trish closed her eyes for a brief moment. She could almost picture Frank pacing inside his old truck, head in his hands, reality tightening around him like a rope he thought he'd never feel. She remembered a time when his pain would have pierced straight into her heart. But not anymore. Pain had a different meaning now, one tied to clarity instead of guilt. Jake, she said softly, your father has had years to think straight. Years to make better decisions. Years to face consequences. He just never believed they would ever reach him. Jake swallowed hard. I know, but it's just so weird seeing him like this. He's always been, Dad, loud, confident, acting like he's got everything under control. Now he's begging me for money I don't have. He tried asking Sophie, but she's drowning in her own mess. I don't know what to do. Trish leaned back in her chair. Honey, this is the first time your father is experiencing what responsibility feels like. Not avoidance. Not excuses, consequences. He's been shielded his whole life, by me, by you two, by luck. But none of that lasts forever. Jake hesitated. So you're not going to help? Trish's voice remained gentle but firm. I'm not going to rescue him. Jake went silent, as though the words hit harder than he expected. Mom. He finally said, I know he messed up, but he's still family. Trish nodded even though he couldn't see it. And you three are still mine. But, Frank. He made himself a stranger a long time ago. Jake sighed shakily. He's calling me every hour. He keeps saying you're the only one who can fix this. That's the problem, Trish said softly. I shouldn't be. I shouldn't have been for years. Your father leaned on me for everything: money, stability, paperwork, bills, decisions. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a lifeline. And then he cut the very person who kept him afloat. Jake didn't argue. He couldn't. Trish's voice stayed smooth, steady. Do you remember how many times he told me I was holding him back? How many times he blamed me for his failures? Meanwhile, I was paying debts he hid from me. Covering loans he swore he'd handle. Keeping lights on when he gambled away checks. Supporting all of you because he didn't know how to budget a single dollar. Jake's breathing grew heavier as he processed everything. You were kids, she continued. I never wanted you to see the truth. I protected you from it. But now, you're grown. And it's time to understand what real responsibility means. Jake cleared his throat. So, what do I tell him? Trish took a small sip of her wine, letting the flavor settle on her tongue. Tell him to call his loan officer. Tell him to speak to his HR department. Tell him to find a financial counselor. Tell him to stay with a friend if he needs a place to sleep. She paused, voice softening but not bending. Tell him to grow up. Jake didn't respond for a moment. When he did, his voice was quiet. He's not going to like that. He's not supposed to like it, Trish said. He's supposed to learn from it. Another long pause, then Jake spoke again, more vulnerable than before. Mom, I'm sorry. For not seeing everything you carried. For believing him without ever asking you how you felt. For letting you deal with all of this alone. Trisha's heart softened. Thank you, she whispered. That means more than you know. Mom? Jake said, voice wavering, do you hate him? She looked out at the glittering city. No, I don't hate him. I just stopped sacrificing myself for a man who never learned how to stand on his own. Jake exhaled shakily. I understand. Good, Trish said gently. Because this is the part every adult has to learn. Nobody is responsible for saving someone who won't save themselves. Jake sniffed once. Okay, I'll tell him. Good, she replied. They hung up and the night fell quiet again. the city humming softly below her. Trish set her phone on the table and let the silence settle around her like a warm blanket. She wasn't angry. She wasn't bitter. She wasn't even relieved that she was free, truly, finally, beautifully free. And Frank? He was finally learning what freedom looked like when you'd spent decades misusing yours. The next afternoon, Trish was in the lobby of her condo building, waiting for a delivery to arrive, when the glass doors slid open and Sophie rushed in. Her hair was messy, her makeup smeared, and her breath came in sharp, uneven gasps as if she had run the whole way. Trish turned slowly, surprised but composed. "Sophie?" she asked softly. "What are you doing here?" Sophie stopped just a few feet away, trying to steady herself. "Mom, it's Dad. He's in the hospital." Trish blinked once, her expression unreadable. "What happened?" Sophie swallowed hard. "He collapsed at work. They said it was stress. His heart. He hasn't been taking care of himself. He hasn't eaten. He hasn't slept. And he doesn't have insurance anymore." Trish exhaled through her nose, recognizing the familiar heaviness of responsibility trying to claw its way back to her shoulders. "Why doesn't he have insurance?" she asked calmly. Sophie's eyes flickered with guilt. "He didn't sign up for Cobra after he lost access to your plan. He said he didn't need it. He thought things would work out." Trish nodded slowly. It made perfect sense. Frank had always treated health, money, and consequences like optional chores he could deal with later. "Mom, please," Sophie pleaded. "Can you come? Just talk to him? He keeps asking for you." Trish looked at her daughter, taking in the puffy eyes, the shaking hands, the fear underneath all that influencer polish. "Where is he?" "St. Mercy Hospital," Sophie answered quickly. "Cardiac observation. He got admitted this morning. He's alone, Mom. He doesn't even have a wallet. Everything is locked in that storage unit." Trish's heart tightened, not in longing, but in memory. 28 years of habit didn't disappear overnight. But neither did the truth. She didn't owe Frank the version of herself who used to fix everything. Still, she nodded once. "I'll come with you." But not because he asked. "Because you're my daughter and you're scared." Sophie sniffed and whispered, "Thank you." They drove in silence, Sophie's hands trembling on her lap as she kept glancing at the passing streets. When they reached the hospital, the cool fluorescent lighting washed over them as they walked through the sliding doors. The receptionist directed them to the observation floor. Frank was lying in a hospital bed when they arrived. His skin looked dull, his eyes tired and hollow. He turned his head slowly when he heard footsteps. When he saw Trish, something like hope flickered in his eyes. "Trish. Thank God I knew you'd come." Trish stood at the foot of the bed, her posture straight, her voice level. "I came because Sophie asked me." Frank swallowed, clearly struggling to find the right words. "I'm sorry. For everything, please. Just hear me out." But Trish didn't move closer. She didn't touch his hand. She didn't break. "Frank," she said softly, "you don't need an apology speech. You need a plan. A real one." Frank blinked slowly. "A plan?" You need to call the hospital's financial counselor," Trish continued. "You need to set up payment arrangements. You need to contact the loan company. You need to talk to HR at the construction company you don't own. You need to handle the consequences of your decisions." Frank's voice cracked. "I can't do that alone." Trish sighed quietly, not unkindly. "You can. You just never had to. That's the difference." Sophie stepped closer to the bed, eyes filled with worry. "Mom, can't you just help him one more time? Please?" Trish looked at her daughter, seeing the same desperation she once felt years ago when Frank's world would crumble, and she'd rush to pick up the pieces. "But she wasn't that woman anymore, Sophie," she said gently. "Helping someone doesn't always mean rescuing them. Sometimes it means stepping back and letting them face the reality they created." Sophie's breath trembled. "But he's Dad." "I know," Trish replied quietly. "And I loved him for a long time. But love without accountability is just enabling. And I'm done enabling him." Frank's eyes filled with tears, not from pain, but from the shock of hearing the truth he had avoided for years. "Trish, please, don't leave me like this." Trish stepped forward just enough to make sure he heard her clearly. Her voice was not harsh, not angry, just honest. Frank, I stayed with you long after you stopped staying with me. I carried you when you should have carried yourself. I forgave things I should never have forgiven. And I kept you standing while you tore me down piece by piece. I'm not abandoning you today. I'm just choosing myself. Frank turned his face away, the weight of her words sinking into him. Sophie's tears fell silently. Mom, I'm scared. Everything feels like it's falling apart. Trish put a gentle hand on her shoulder. Sweetheart, things don't fall apart. They fall into place. Sometimes the truth rearranges your world so you can finally see it clearly. Sophie looked at her, eyes searching. So you're not coming back? Not helping fix everything? No, Trish said softly. I've retired from being everybody's savior. They left the room, the quiet footsteps echoing down the hospital hallway. When they reached the parking lot, the warm evening breeze brushed past them. Carrying the soft scent of night jasmine, Sophie wiped her cheeks. I don't want to be like him, she whispered. I want to learn. I want to do better. Trish looked at her with gentle pride. Then start now. Stand on your own 2 feet. Learn the things your father never did. And as they walked to the car, Trish felt something shift inside her, not bitterness, not sadness, but a quiet, resolute freedom. She wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't grieving anymore. She wasn't looking back. For the first time in decades, she felt whole. 2 weeks passed quietly, and for the first time in years, Trish felt a rhythm in her life that wasn't built around someone else's chaos. Her mornings were peaceful, her evenings were calm, and her heart felt lighter every day she spent away from Frank's storm. But peace has a way of being tested. And that test arrived on a Wednesday morning inside Margaret Daniels' office, where the truth came wrapped in legal language, sharp enough to cut through even Trish's newfound calm. Margaret sat across from her, a stack of documents in a tidy folder, her expression serious. Trish, she began, tapping the papers lightly, we have a new development. Something Frank's investigator dug up. Trish raised a brow. What now? Margaret slid the folder toward her. It's an old trust, dated 1998, created by your father before his passing. You were only 25 at the time, so it was structured to protect your assets with 2 trustees, you and Frank. Trish frowned slowly, confusion settling into her features. I barely remember that trust. I know, Margaret replied, because nothing was done with it for years. It just sat there, untouched. But legally, it owns 40% of everything tied to your business assets. Trish felt her heart tighten, not with fear, but with disbelief. 40%? And Frank is co-trustee? Margaret nodded calmly. Which means he has the right to contest your recent moves. He could claim mismanagement. He could request liquidation. He could demand access. Trish leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling for a moment as the weight of it all pressed down. After everything he's done, that man still has the nerve to fight for money he didn't earn. Margaret nodded. Oh, he has the nerve. And he has a lawyer pushing him to use it. You need to prepare for a courtroom battle. Before Trish could respond, her phone buzzed. Frank's name flashed across the screen. She hesitated, then answered. His voice was small, shaky. Trish, we need to talk. She kept her tone neutral. About what? The trust, he whispered. My lawyer told me everything. I didn't know it still existed. I didn't know I had rights to 40%. I don't want to fight you. Let's just drop everything. Drop the divorce. Drop the restraining order. We'll try again. I'll forgive what you did with the house. We can start fresh. Trish closed her eyes, not because she was tempted, but because she couldn't believe how predictable he still was. Frank, you're not calling to fix anything. You're calling because you want access to money. He didn't respond. She continued, her voice steady. I'm not dropping anything. I'm not reconciling. I'm not negotiating behind closed doors. I'll see you in court. When she hung up, Margaret gave a small nod. Good, because he's bluffing. And we're about to end his bluff permanently. Court day arrived with a sharp chill in the air. The courthouse hallways were filled with echoes of heels, whispers, and tension. Trish walked alongside Margaret, wearing a deep green suit that wrapped her like armor elegant. Powerful, steady. Frank stood at the opposite end of the hall, thinner, paler, and tired. Amber was nowhere in sight. Sophie and Jake didn't come either. They had quietly stepped back after realizing the truth about their father. Inside the courtroom, Frank's lawyer opened aggressively. Your Honor, my client is entitled to 40% of Mrs. Holt's assets per the 1998 trust. We request full access to the business, the proceeds from the home sale, and her liquid accounts. Trish sat still, expression unreadable. Margaret stood and delivered her response with the precision of a woman who had dismantled 1,000 liars before breakfast. Your Honor, we will not argue the trust. We acknowledge it. But before Mr. Holt claims entitlement, let's review the financial conduct over the last 5 years. She pulled out a thick packet and handed it to the judge. Here you will find records showing 12,700,000 of marital funds diverted by Mr. Holt to support an extramarital relationship. Hotel stays, jewelry, cash withdrawals, luxury dinners, vacations, and transportation all concealed from my client. This constitutes financial betrayal and misappropriation. Frank's face dropped. Margaret continued without mercy. Additionally, Mr. Holt is not entitled to 40% of Mrs. Holt's assets because the trust is dormant and has never been funded. The value exists solely because Mrs. Holt built her company into a thriving enterprise independently. Mr. Holt contributed nothing. Under Georgia law, a co-trustee cannot claim earnings they did not help generate. The judge flipped through the pages, his expression tightening as he read. Margaret delivered the final blow. Lastly, Your Honor, my client's net worth exceeds $47 million. 40% of her assets would place Mr. Holt at over $19 million, an amount he seeks purely out of greed, not legal standing. Whispers rippled through the courtroom. Frank's lawyer stammered. Your Honor, we request a recess. No need, Margaret cut in smoothly. My client is offering a settlement. Frank's head snapped up. Trish finally spoke, her voice steady, clear, and unshakable. Frank, here's my offer. $50,000. A clean payout. And your personal belongings from the storage unit. In exchange, you sign away all trust involvement, all business claims, and all rights to my assets. You will also repay the $127,000 you misused, which will be garnished from your wages over the next 10 years. Frank stared at her like she had struck him. $50,000? After everything I did for you? Margaret leaned in slightly. After everything she did for you, and after everything you stole. Frank looked to his lawyer for help, but even he couldn't save him now. The judge cleared his throat, given the evidence. Mrs. Holt's offer is extremely generous. Frank's shoulders slumped. His voice broke. I don't have a choice, do I? Trish met his eyes calmly. You have a choice! You can take the deal, or we can keep going. If we keep going, you won't receive a dime, and you may face charges. The silence in the courtroom stretched thin. Frank finally whispered, Fine, I'll sign. Trish nodded once. Good. And in that moment she watched the last thread tying her to him snap cleanly. Good. Quietly, beautifully. The trust, the marriage, the money. The control he thought he had. All gone. Phase 4 was complete. And Trish was almost free. The courthouse hallway was quiet when the judge dismissed the case, the echo of the gavel still hanging in the air like the last note of a long, unfinished song. Trish stepped out of the courtroom with Margaret by her side, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. Everything felt lighter, cleaner. The weight she had carried for nearly 30 years was gone. Not because someone lifted it for her, but because she finally put it down herself. Behind them, Frank followed slowly, shoulders hunched, eyes unfocused. He looked smaller than she had ever seen him, like a man who finally understood the cost of the life he built on lies and dependency. Trish, he called out, his voice thin, almost fragile. She stopped. Not out of interest, not out of nostalgia, but because she was no longer running from him. When she turned, his eyes were full of regret, guilt, and a desperate hope she knew he didn't deserve. Trish. Please, he whispered. I'm sorry. I mean it. I messed up everything. I lost you. I lost the house. I lost the kids. I lost everything. Please, give me one more chance. I'll do better. I promise. I'll go to counseling. I'll fix my life. Just don't leave me like this. Trish looked at him with a steady calm that settled over her like a warm coat in winter. Frank, she said quietly, you're not losing me today. You lost me the moment you told me I was old and useless. The moment you looked at me like I was an obstacle instead of your partner. The moment you chose another woman and expected me to accept it. Today isn't about losing me. Today is the day you finally face the consequences you avoided your entire life. Frank shook his head, tears forming. I can't do this alone. Trish stepped closer, not enough for comfort, just enough for clarity. Frank, you were alone the whole time. Even when I stood beside you, you weren't choosing us. You were choosing yourself. Now you'll get exactly what you chose. He looked down, defeated. I don't know how to start over. You learned, Trish said gently. The same way I had to. The same way you should have years ago. He didn't argue. He didn't beg again. He simply nodded, wiped his face, and walked away quietly, slowly, the sound of his footsteps fading until Trish couldn't hear them anymore. Later that week, papers were signed, the settlement finalized, and Trish's life was officially her own. She sold what remained of the storage unit items, donated parts of the proceeds to a local women's shelter, and cut the last financial tie to Frank Holt. 6 months passed, each one smoother and brighter than the last dot. Her new life unfolded like a fresh chapter, her downtown condo traded for a modern beach house on Tybee Island, just outside Savannah. A 2-story home with tall windows and ocean breezes drifting through the halls. Morning sunlight filtered through sheer curtains. Evenings were painted in soft shades of lavender and rose as the waves whispered against the shore. Trish spent her days walking along the sand, cooking in her open kitchen with jazz humming softly. In the background, reading novels she never had time for before, and building her company even stronger. She found peace not in escaping her past, but in reclaiming her present. One sunny morning, as she stood on her balcony overlooking the quiet sea, her phone buzzed. Sophie's name lit up the screen. Trish smiled softly and answered. Hey, baby. Sophie's voice was lighter than it had been in months. Mom, guess what? I got hired. A real job. Marketing assistant at a design firm. I've been working hard, saving money, paying my own bills. Trish felt a warmth spread through her chest. I'm proud of you. Thanks, Sophie said quietly. And, Mom? I want to visit you, not to ask for anything. Not to fix anything, I want to spend time with you. Real time. Trish laughed softly. Only if we're going Dutch. Sophie let out a little breath, half laugh, half relief. Deal. And in that moment, Trish felt something she hadn't felt in years, a connection that wasn't built on obligation, fear, or sacrifice, but on love, honesty, and growth. After the call ended, Trish looked out at the ocean, the horizon stretching wide and open. The waves shimmered under the sun, each one rolling forward like a promise. She wasn't just free, she was becoming someone. New. Someone stronger. Someone wiser. Someone whole. At 52 years old. Patricia Trish Holt was worth $47 million. But her true wealth was the peace she finally owned. The peace she built for herself. Brick by brick, truth by truth, choice by choice. She breathed in the salt air, closed her eyes, and smiled. She wasn't starting over, she was just getting started.